Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use, tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, you guys, I found another interesting story and sad. I'm trying to figure out what this is. It's a Substack blog. Manufacturing consent. So just to give you a precursor, Neil Gaiman is a Scientologist. And the story was done by Annabelle Ross, dated July 8th, 2024. Untangling the Neil Gaiman sexual assault allegations and the Tortoise Media investigation that is both flawed and important. Definitely not a handsome dude, is he? Okay, trigger warning. This piece contains graphic descriptions of SA. If it gets too rough, I'm going to replace words or just skip it altogether. But I also want to make correlations between Paul Haggis and if there's any other people I can think of in how the assaults occurred. I came across the Neil Gaiman story via a post that landed on my Instagram feed on Friday morning. I saw that Gaiman had been accused of sexual assault, and as someone who reports on sexual assault committed by powerful figures, I immediately wanted to know more. And then she shows her, well, it's a publication, The Politics of Dancing is the name. I found the podcast, which of course I'm going to listen to. I found the podcast that had broken the story 2 days prior and started listening. I ended up devouring all 4 episodes of Master the Allegations against Neil Gaiman in one go. Equally horrified and compelled. Horrified at Gaiman's alleged assaults. One of a 21-year-old in 2022, when he was 61. So then there's the correlation between Haggis, his assaults, and Gaiman. They like him young. And one of 20-year-old in 2005. Mind you, these are the ones that have come forward. One of a 20-year-old in 2005 when he was 45. I personally wonder if they were Scientologists. But regardless, he's a Scientologist. Described in shocking graphic detail, horrified at what had also been revealed about his ex-wife, Amanda Palmer. I wonder if Amanda was one of those forced marriages. And about how New Zealand police responded to Gaiman's accuser when she went to them for help. Oh, this should be interesting. More police that cover up SA, isn't that something? Compelled because, as a journalist who has written extensively about sexual assault, I know how difficult it is to report on. I had never heard it covered quite like this before, and by a company I had never heard of. Tortoise Media. I was stunned by what was revealed. In far more detail than what had been permitted by the lawyers I've worked with when covering stories of this nature, and was incredulous that so much of what is traditionally withheld out of extreme legal prudence was divulged. The experience became even more surreal when I realized that one of the main journalists investigating was Rachel Johnson, sister of former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. an avowed TERF who opined in The Spectator, "It's hard not to give pity, Ghislaine Maxwell." Problematic doesn't begin to describe it, but this is not a calculated commission on Tortoise's part. Johnson, host of the podcast Difficult Women, was a journalist originally contacted by the main accuser, Scarlett Johnson, then teamed up with award-winning reporter Paul Carana Galicia to investigate. I'll talk more about the reporting of the case later. First, though, a recap of what the podcast reveals. Yeah, go check out those podcasts, you guys. Walls are caving in on these predators. Rachel Johnson, the journalist who was first approached by Gaiman's main accuser, Scarlett. Scarlett described herself as a friend of Amanda Palmer before Palmer hired her as a live-in pair nanny to help care for Palmer and Gaiman's young son, Ash, in February 2022. On Scarlett's first day working for the couple, Ash was at a friend's house, and Scarlett was left alone with Gaiman in his Waiheque, New Zealand home. Within a few hours of their meeting, Gaiman climbed into an outdoor bath that Scarlett had run for herself. And according to Scarlett, Blank penetrated her with his blank without her consent. That's sick. These people are sick. This was the beginning of a 3-week sexual relationship between Scarlett, then 21, and Gaiman, then 61. Oh, that's not predatory. She could be his granddaughter. Sick. In which Scarlett says, Gaiman entered her blank without consent. That's known as the RAPE word. I know it's confusing to some people. And I know a lot why a lot of these places are not using that word, because evil doers don't want you to recognize not consent as that word anymore, which is an act of violence. Gaiman entered her blank without consent or warning in their second sexual encounter, which is our word. On another occasion that he blank, the pain was so intense she passed out. Oh my God. That's also it's an occult ritual, but I don't know that this guy is an occultist. Gaiman repeatedly subjected her to degrading sexual acts, including having her perform blank on him as punishment when she screamed as a result of painful blank sex, which she referred to as having to clean him up. She says he also used his belt on her. Let's remember he's a Scientologist too. According to Gaiman, Scarlett had agreed to share a bath on that first night, in which they merely made out and cuddled consensually. Gotta wonder what's in people's minds sometimes. He says he never blanked Scarlett with his blank, and that within days of their meeting, she expressed an interest in mild BDSM. He says their relationship... Oh, wait. Oh, sorry, you guys. I'm just trying to figure out if she said that or he said it. She expressed an interest in mild BDSM. He says their relationship was entirely consensual. They always do, don't they? They always, you guys notice it's always the same story. Predators. A court of law might agree with Gaiman, because although Scarlett went to Johnson alleging assault, and before that to the New Zealand police, she did express enthusiastic consent throughout her relationship with Gaiman. I didn't see that. Did you guys see that? Scarlett hands over to Tortoise Media the entire archive of WhatsApp messages between her and Gaiman, and on the podcast, Johnson describes Scarlett as seeming besotted with him. So sick to me. Ugh. And evil. At the same time that she texted a friend the next day, telling them about the bath with Gaiman and saying that he crossed the boundaries. He was playing with her head. Scarlett also texted Gaiman. She signed off her message. Thank you for a lovely, lovely night. Wow. This is where things get messy, emotionally and evidentially. Caruana Galicia narrates, but anyone who's worked with victims of grooming and assault, that's what he was doing, can tell you how common it is for survivors to develop feelings for their abusers. What is that called? I can't think of it right now. As an expert points out on the podcast. It's something syndrome. Can't think of it right now. Scarlett says she told Amanda Palmer about what happened with Gaiman the following month, and that Palmer told her she was the 14th effing woman who had gone to her. Wow, he's getting around. According to Scarlett, when she broached the subject with Palmer saying, Neil made a pass at me, Palmer responded, I bet he did. Palmer did not respond to Tortoise's numerous emails and WhatsApp messages requesting comment. That's because of legalities. They don't want anything on record. Horrified by what these allegations inferred, on Saturday morning, I went to Palmer's Instagram page to see if she had addressed them. She hadn't, and the vast majority of comments on her page were offering love and support. When one person expressed sympathy that Palmer had involuntarily gotten caught up in this, I felt compelled to interject. Involuntarily, I wrote. Apparently, this young woman was the 14 women, you guys, that we know of, to tell Amanda about Neil doing this kind of thing. He's just disgusting. I made several more comments interacting with fans who clearly hadn't listened to the podcast. I explained why I agreed with one commenter who felt that feminist icon Palmer, who has been like Gaiman, outspoken in her support of survivors of sexual assault. That seems to be a theme with these predators. They like to go on record saying that they support the victims, and meanwhile they're assaulting. Owed it to her fans, outspoken in her support of survivors of sexual assault, owed it to her fans, many of them patrons, an explanation. By Saturday night, my comments, alongside the few others, querying Palmer's involvement, had been deleted. When Scarlett eventually went to New Zealand police to report what had happened with Gaiman, she was told they weren't going to pursue. There we go. Oh, I can't wait to. You guys, let's just put a poll in and guess what's the bullshit reason why they can't press charges on a man who's R-ing a woman. I just really want to know. They weren't going to pursue the case because she'd have a hard time making the allegations stick in court. Oh, really? So that's the police's job now to sift through what goes through court and what doesn't? Handlers. In a recording of her conversation, facts. In a recording of her conversation with a police officer, Scarlett asks if he has interviewed Gaiman or Palmer. Bet he didn't. And the policeman tells her no, of course he didn't. If you guys think some of these police are not predators, I don't know what to tell you. It's one of many examples in the podcast of the type of evidence that is almost never shared publicly, for better or for worse. I was grateful to have been made privy to it, while praying that Tortoise's lawyers knew what they were doing. During his investigation, Caruana Galicia came across a source who connected him with another woman who claimed to have been sexually assaulted by Gaiman during their relationship. Kay, an American, was 18 when she met Palmer in 2003 at a book signing in Florida. Take note of this, women. Take note of this. With Haggis, one of his victims, she made the mistake of going into his apartment. You got to watch these predators, man. That's where they get their victims, especially if you're a fan of theirs. Just be careful. A year later, Kay says Gaiman invited her and another female friend to come to bed with him when they went back to his place. Mistake number one. After they all went out for dinner. The 19-year-olds declined. Good. The following year, when she was 20 and Gaiman was 45, sick, Kay entered a romantic and sexual relationship with the author. Kay alleges that in one incident while on holiday in the UK, she pleaded with Gaiman not to penetrate her blank, as she had a painful UTI at the time. She says he ignored her and did it anyway, causing her agony. Again, the details of their relationship are nightmarishly complicated for law enforcement and media lawyers. As with Scarlett, the assault happened in context of a consensual relationship. I think that's part of his, like, this is the act that he does to kind of make it blurry. And Gaiman and Kay continued to maintain a friendship up until 2022, at which point Kay says she saw the relationship for what it was. Gaiman denies any unlawful behavior with Kay and is disturbed by her allegations. You see that? According to Tortoise Media. But even if these relationships were as Gaiman described them, both betray a huge imbalance in power dynamics. Yes. That right there, that's against the law in many places. With Gaiman being at least 25 and up to 40 years older, than the sub-22-year-old woman in question. Yeah, young enough to be his granddaughter. Sick. And with one meeting him as a fan and another starting out as an employee. Also, I know I'm really jumping in here a lot, but if you guys go look up, what's his name? One of the Carter brothers. I can't think of his first name now. It was Aaron Carter's brother. And I don't know a lot about Aaron. I mean, I need to do some research on him. But Aaron Carter's brother, one of the NSYNC members, assaulted one of his fans on the tour bus. Isn't that wonderful, you guys? Not only did he assault her, she had disabilities. Yeah, isn't that wonderful? My experience in investigating sexual assault has taught me that when there's smoke, there's usually a blazing inferno. In the few days since the podcast was released, many commenters on Reddit have alluded to rumors of sexual impropriety that have swirled around Gaiman and Palmer for decades. When investigating these kinds of stories, I'm a little confused, Palmer. I'll have to go back. When investigating these kinds of stories, I typically speak with many survivors who either choose not to share their stories publicly or whose accounts don't pass risk-averse legal muster. It seems highly probable that there are many more survivors, yes, of Gaiman's abuse out there. Wonder how many Scientology women he got to as well. And Tortoise have already teased somewhat tawdrily on social media. Since publishing, we've come to realize that the problem is much bigger than we realized. Yep. See if he actually goes to jail. I'm glad that the master has kicked off the investigation into Gaiman's sexual misconduct and hope he will be held accountable for his actions. I have no connection. It's a little bit more than sexual misconduct, fools. It's the R word, R-A-P-E, remember that word? An act of violence against a woman, sometimes against a man, and children as well. I have no connection with Tortoise or anyone involved, but I do recommend listening to the podcast, currently free, in its entirety, as there are too many shocking revelations to describe in detail here, many of which had me open-mouthed in disbelief. We all need to go listen to these. Responding to Scarlett's allegations, Gaiman described her as mentally ill. There you go. We all know this. It's the first thing they do to discredit people. Politicians do it. The wealthy do it. Narcissists do it. Artists do it. And said she had a condition associated with false memories. Oh, you guys don't get me started with false memory syndrome. I can't right now. I'll just go off. It's a bullshit story. It's a whole fake syndrome that was created to cover up for pedophiles and predators. It's a fact. A condition there is no medical record of course. According to Tortoise, Scarlett blessed the reporters with a goldmine of material evidence that should have been more than enough for New Zealand police to follow up with her complaint. Just like LAPD. Oh. Never forget Officer Tipping. Including voice messages sent to her from Gaiman, messages she sent to friends the night of and morning after the bath, and notes she wrote in her phone contemporaneously. Following their brief relationship in a period of which Scarlett was bluicidal, Gaiman offered to pay her rent for 6 months while she got back on her feet. That's cover-up. It's not because he cares about her. At this time, he also had Scarlett sign, oh, you guys wait. Like Mike Rinder has child SA victim sign, had her sign an NDA, dating back to her first day of employment, the day he got into a bath with her. These NDAs just need to be nullified for the most part. It's just like you see all those images of people putting their finger on their mouth. Think that's an accident? I appreciated that the podcast shared many of these lesser-heard details, which provide important insight and context. But apart from the unforgivable fact of one of the reporters being a defender of Ghislaine Maxwell, you guys know, you know, I had other criticisms of Master. The third episode goes on a tangent about Gaiman's Scientologist upbringing, without connecting it in any meaningful way with the current allegations. I think that's their distraction stories. Beyond the unfounded claim that Gaiman's father was a sexual assaulter. Oh, there we go. An accusation leveled by the notoriously untrustworthy Church of Scientology. Let me say that again. An accusation leveled by the notoriously untrustworthy Church of Scientology. I'm going to scroll back real quick. I mean, look at him. Look at him. Those dead eyes. Ugh. When interviewing Scarlett and in her narration, Johnson regularly slips into victim blaming. Lines of questioning both directed at Scarlett and rhetorical. Did you jump out of the bath at any point? You see this shit? Why would anyone stay around for this? These questions might have been posed on the part of Johnson's imagined audience, but they're raised indelicately and do her credibility no favors. So that's called cover-up. I also question the editorial judgment involving certain people in the story. Those are the handlers, you guys. Gaiman had actor Fiona Shaw, who stars in the American adaptation of his novel, Anansi Boys, record a sympathetic message for Scarlett while she was bluicidal, which you can hear in the podcast. We're told that it's unclear what Shaw knew of Gaiman and Scarlett's relationship, which makes you wonder why she was dragged into this at all. Kind of like Coster was dragged into all that Masterson stuff. Gaiman and Palmer's therapist, who had a conversation with Scarlett regarding what happened, but who couldn't talk to Johnson or Caruana Galicia out of client confidentiality. I'm happy to hear that one. Does it still freaking exist? Is mentioned by name, which seemed unnecessary and imprudent. Yeah, they're trying to oust her. That's what they do. There is another former nanny. It's always with the nannies. You guys notice this? There is another former nanny, unnamed, who may or may not have had an experience with Gaiman, and who allegedly asked Scarlett in an email if she had signed an NDA, followed by a sad face emoji. I hope this person consented to having their correspondence included in this podcast. What happens if people break the NDAs? We should all test it. All these women that were assaulted or children that were assaulted and now grown up, just start talking and see what happens. I applaud Scarlett's bravery for sharing her story, and she clearly gave Tortoise permission to call her by her first name in the podcast. But this information alone makes her an easy target on and off the internet. I am genuinely fearful of the backlash and victim blaming from Gaiman's fans. Who cares? Really, honestly, who cares? Anybody that is going to victim blame, birds of a feather. I don't want to go into a big long story, but you guys know I was doing a lot of my previous channel. I was doing a lot of exposing pedophilia, as well as like the pyramid scheme and the Setiism and the Satanism and all these things, and especially with the trafficking of children and the symbolism, which I may do again. Eventually I will. Just 1 or 2 videos. But they always yes, you do have people that will what am I trying to say? They will protect them and say, oh, they didn't do it. But a lot of them are the same kind of people. So that's what I'm trying to say. Ay. I'm genuinely fearful of the backlash and victim blaming from Gaiman's fans that she might endure for years from now. I sincerely hope she is receiving appropriate protection and care. I am very, very interested to see how this case unfolds from here. I am interested to see how many more women will come forward. I hope a lot do. Scientologist women, too. If that happened to you, come out and talk about it. I am interested to see if New Zealand police will take belated action. I am interested to see if Amanda Palmer will respond to the inference that she, at best, left a vulnerable young woman alone with her husband, knowing about his sexual proclivities, and at worst was part of the grooming process. I am interested to see how Gaiman will try to defend having sexual relationships with vulnerable subordinate women. Well, look at how, I'm going to try not to, he's just not attractive. I mean, but that never gives any excuse for this kind of behavior. I am interested to see how Gaiman will try to defend having sexual relationships with vulnerable subordinate women less than half his age, consensually or otherwise. Sick. Despite wishing desperately that Scarlett had chosen someone other than Rachel Johnson to share her story with, I'm glad that Caruana Galicia came on board, a reputable reporter and the son of the assassinated investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galicia, about whom he wrote an award-winning book. They don't want this out. He lends some much-needed credibility to the proceedings. I know little about Tortoise Media, which has been described in The Guardian as a rich person's club. And I groaned when a conservative-leaning news podcast was advertised midway through one episode. Yeah, it sounds like it's controlled opposition. But I am glad that Tortoise took this project on, where many others may not have. After listening to Master 1, also listen to the recent 2-part series, Taking the Stand, illustrating how 2R survivors were failed by the UK justice system. That's no surprise. Go listen to John Wedger. I'm yet to explore more of their journalism, but I am impressed with Tortoise's work covering sexual assault in much-needed ways. To say Master was imperfectly executed is an understatement, but I'm grateful for it, both as a means of hopefully helping to ensure that Gaiman is held accountable for his behavior, and for its willingness to explore the gray area of consent that so often impedes the police courts. That was all by design he did that. And other media outlets from helping survivors in any meaningful way. Fans of Gaiman and or critics of Tortoise and Johnson might be inclined to seize upon some of the podcast's flaws. But let us not lose sight of the main news here. Neil Gaiman took advantage of 2 vulnerable young women sexually, and this is likely the tip of the iceberg, yes. The messenger might not have been ideal, but let it not detract from this essential truth. So that's it, you guys. You guys know there are a lot more victims in the background. You know that. So I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night wherever you are.